So good morning, everybody. So we shall start. Jonathan. So ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the AIRCA and CATIE event on restoring landscape through climate-smart agriculture. It's very nice to see a full house. Perfect. So we are glad today to present to you examples of how AIRCA members have developed different aspects of climate-smart agriculture and how this has contributed to healthy landscape and improved livelihood. So the way we're going to conduct the 1 hour and a half event is that we're going to have a short introduction of AIRCA, followed by an introduction of the concept of healthy landscapes based on the white paper of AIRCA, after which we would carry a panel discussion to explore further healthy landscapes, in particular in relation to many sustainable development goals that AIRCA directly contribute to. We also aim through this discussion to highlight some of the challenges ahead and make specific recommendations for policymakers to help them develop strategies to operationalize the climate-smart agriculture and the healthy landscapes approach. So welcome to this event, and let me ask my friend Dr. Dyno Keatinge, to AIRCA Chairman and also Director General of AVRDC World Vegetable Center, to give us his welcome remark and introduction of AIRCA.
Thank you. So, respected Madam Mediator and Vice Chair of AIRCA, Dr. Ismahane Elouafi. It's been 42 years now since I graduated from university in the UK, and I've learned at least one thing. I don't learn easily, but I learned one thing, and that is that facilitating the development of crops and livestock and people and countries in the tropics and subtropics undergoing climate change is a much more complex business than most of our political leaders, and I'm looking at one across the other side of the gangway there, and the general public remotely appreciates. And as DG of AVRDC, the World Vegetable Center, which is an agricultural research and development center dedicated to the task of bringing about successful development, how am I to tackle this complexity without drowning in the details that accompany multifaceted problems? How do I ensure that my center's research remains valid and relevant and does not pander to each new technological fad that comes out, or even to the current short-term whims of the donors? And let's face it, you get plenty of them as well. So we've now got the Sustainable Development Goals. They provide, frankly, better guidance than we had before on how to proceed. But they have 17 goals and 100-plus targets, and so therefore it remains a bit of a problem. How to prioritize the effort and how to get clarity of approach. These remain quite challenging issues to scientists, administrators, and others. So one vital move then, as far as I can see, is to admit the complexity of these issues and reach out to friends. So that means many of the organizations in this particular audience that are equally dedicated to development, and take advantage of the diversity and complementary scientific disciplines in our partner centers. Next, please. Well, it's me, is it? Right. Hang on a sec. Very good. So, the Association of International Research and Development Centers for Agriculture, AIRCA, it's a voluntary alliance of well-established institutes operating at a global level. It facilitates the joint action of these friends, and there are 9 centers there, and you can see the individual ones and their logos. And perhaps you're not so familiar with the Mountain Center in Nepal, Ismahane, or with the Insect Center in Kenya, and the now renamed World Bamboo and Rattan organization, which continues with INBAR as its logo. Anyway, these are obvious first step in collaborating amongst these different centers towards effectively addressing global problems. So our second affiliation for AIRCA is with the CGIAR centers, and I'm very happy to see many of them represented in this room, IFPRI, ICRAF, C4, and many others I'm sure also, and with the actions obviously of major international NGOs, with universities, with the agricultural private sector. We all need to be able to work together in order to be able to help to solve some of these major long-term problems. And also I'd like to say thank you also to the donors who are present in the room, and particularly I'd like to single out the BMZ and the government of Germany, and also the Department for International Development from the UK, who personally support several of the AIRCA centres. And I think probably it would be fair to include the government of Norway as a major contributor to healthy landscapes. And I should not forget my major donor, the Republic of China. Now, these coherent partnerships form a framework on a scale at which global agricultural development problems and world climate change can be appropriately addressed. You need a big scale if you're going to do this. It should permit research results to be combined and appropriately scaled out to bring beneficial development to human and animal communities, and to permit the recreation or functional maintenance of valuable biotic ecosystems. Now, we must not forget that without healthy ecosystems and development, our development efforts probably will prove to be futile. And to achieve their development goals, the AIRCA centers aim to operate at a landscape level. And this allows scientific inquiry to flourish at all levels, from microscopic all the way from fields to farm, to forest and to watersheds. And thus then the results can be allowed appropriate interaction over the different scales amongst the variables. They can be interpreted and scaled at a landscape level to then address the real development issues and provide coherent and functional evidence-based policy that can then be effectively developed. All of the donors now are looking for evidence-based research, and the only way you can provide that at a landscape level is for many of the centers essentially to work in harmony together. Now, to encompass the full panoply of AIRCA's reach, we have this summary slide. It's evident that many of the SDGs are being addressed by this group to a greater or lesser extent, and their association is evidently a powerful tool in helping to address pressing global development issues in a coherent manner. And you'll notice that instead of going from 1 to 17 in this particular case, we've gone from 17 to 1, because the logic for that is that partnership in goal 17 is the key variable here. So all of us in this room are probably representing that particular goal, and we would like to hope that you could collaborate with the AIRCA centers and their partners in bringing that about. Now, a new initiative which we're involved with is the Global Action Plan for Agricultural Diversification. Crop diversification and animal is an obvious essential feature of a healthy landscape and vital to provide sufficient resilience in agricultural systems subject to the vagaries of climate change. So as an example of the innovative actions in which AIRCA has formulated for this new climate change conference of the parties, I bring your attention to the new Global Action Plan for Agricultural Diversification. And if you don't recognize the echinoids in the picture, this is Crops for the Future headquarters in Kuala Lumpur. Now, Crops for the Future are the lead agency in the Paris Declaration on agricultural diversification, feeding a hotter world. The GAPAD initiative promulgates the idea that agricultural diversification can help humanity withstand climate change through greater food and nutritional security by minimizing environmental harm, alleviating poverty, supporting the wise use of land, and helping to combat diversification. And the GAPAD plan for agriculture is in a changing climate, is ambitious, it's global, it's inclusive, it's evidence-based. And I believe that it shows bold leadership that supports a common vision and agreed activities, timelines, and deliverables drawn from a range of views and inputs. Now, the GAPAD event, which is going to be on Monday, will emphasize the importance of agriculturally diverse landscapes in an era of climate change. Signatories will include eminent scientists, industry and political leaders, representatives of international agencies, and a wide representation of public and private interests. And the Paris Declaration will be available for further electronic signature up to and beyond the first GAPAD event. This will be followed by a second event, which is going to be held in Malaysia, in Kuala Lumpur, in early 2016. And there will be a big culminating event in Rome with IFAD support in summer 2016. And we seek everybody's support for this major development effort. So if you or your organization are willing to sign up to the Global Action Plan for Agricultural Diversification, then Saeed Azamali, the DG of CFF, will tell us how to do that in due course. So I'll now hand over to my good friend and colleague, Trevor Nicholls, the Chief Executive Officer of CAB International, and he's going to address some of the key questions. There are two there. I think you can probably read them more easily than I can recite them, but he will essentially be dealing with why a healthy landscape approach is important and what is the problems for upscaling climate-smart agriculture. So Trevor, over to you. Thank you very much. Escape. You have to click on it. Okay. That's it. Good.
Thank you very much, Dyno, for that introduction. Thank you to my AIRCA colleagues for giving me the honour of letting me represent you all. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for giving your time to join us today. So what I'd like to do is really give an overview of our thoughts on landscapes. As Dyno has very clearly shown you, the AIRCA Institute members have a very broad-ranging set of capabilities and experiences, but I'm not going to pretend to you this morning that we have a magic silver bullet that can solve landscape problems. Landscapes are complex beasts, and it requires quite a broad range of capabilities to address. So the context, I think we're all very familiar with. Increasing demand for the 4 Fs of food, fodder, fuel, and fibre to satisfy a growing population. But trying to balance that imperative to increase yields and outputs whilst at the same time making sustainable use of the environment which delivers those 4 Fs. So we face the perfect storm. John Beddington from the UK has coined this phrase before. We're trying to do all this in a face of not just growing world population, but a changing climate, and an increasingly variable and unpredictable climate, dwindling mineral resources, and growing water shortage. So by 2050, we'll be seeking to feed over 9 billion people. We'll need to produce 60% more food. But 60% of the population will be living in cities and 40% of the population under 18. So a staggering shift in dynamics of demand and supply. Still, we estimate 40% of the population working in agriculture, and of that 40%, 70% of them will be smallholder or family farmers. Increasing smallholder farmer productivity and their access to markets, and that second caveat is crucial, can have a profound effect on livelihoods and prosperity for literally millions of people. That's the World Bank's view. I think it's very much AIRCA's view as well. The challenge is, how do we achieve that? There's much greater competition for land use, not just for agriculture, for mining, for housing, for water conservation, and indeed for just environmental and recreation purposes. We can't just focus on the major cereals in achieving that. Man can't live on rice, maize, and wheat alone. We have to think about vegetables, fruits, and cash crops like cocoa and coffee as well if we're to improve livelihoods. So landscapes present us with multiple and complex challenges. And in developing landscape approaches, it's very much about trade-offs. It's about agriculture versus ecosystem services, getting the best balance there. Farm versus non-farm occupation. Increasingly, if farm sizes to grow for efficiency, we need to find other rural occupations which add value to that farming output. Landscapes also are no respecters of national borders. Rivers rise in one country, flow through another, and perhaps are used for hydroelectricity or irrigation as they pass through those countries. So it requires governments to have shared priorities and to cooperate with each other to make the trade-offs in usage and demand and to capture the synergy. And I think above all in the landscape issue, we lack good metrics of how we can do that and how we can make those trade-offs. So what we see in AIRCA is the need, as I've highlighted, to increase smallholder productivity within landscapes and make sure that we help farmers scale out and scale up integrated management approaches. So that's integrated pest management, soil health management, crop management, integrated water management as well, to build greater capacity so that those communities can be more resilient to climate change and help themselves adapt to the changes that do occur. That requires, of course, good governance and policy support, which we can have influence on, but we have no control over. But it also requires government to improve infrastructure, access, both physical access, but also access to power, to mobile telecommunications, because modern ICTs offer us a great opportunity to reach beyond individual villages or towns and actually have coordinated information and action at the landscape level. So by increasing productivity, we must close yield gaps and increase climate resilience. And I've mentioned these already. It's managing soil fertility better, using our water more effectively and economically, so that we help prevent and adapt as necessary to salinization of soils, which is a growing problem worldwide. Dyno has touched upon, I think, the really important initiative from CFF to get much greater variety of crops and seeds used by farmers and promoting that greater crop diversity, not just in terms of growing it, but making sure that we stimulate the demand for it in terms of diets, telling people how to use that diversity more effectively, or perhaps even to use it for non-dietary income purposes. And it's a shocking fact that we lose 40% of what we grow today to pests and diseases before it even starts to hit the value chains. So if we can make some inroads very quickly into those losses, we can have more food output today without any extra land being used, without any extra water, and probably with less chemical inputs. So the battle against pests, disease, and invasive weeds is a very important low-hanging fruit. Looking at integrated crop management is really at the core of the landscapes approach. It's not just about the crop itself, it's about thinking about the rotation of crops within that environment, the selection of sites, and the interactions between ecosystem services, the land, the environment, and the crops. And really the focus of what we're trying to do with AIRCA is bring about healthy plants, people, and animals within a healthy environment. The broader context is a need for integrated landscape planning to support both development and conservation. And that does require recognizing the transboundary issues in landscapes so that, as I mentioned before, we have to work with all of the governments that have impact upon a landscape and lobby, influence, persuade to get them to adopt a concerted set of policies which will help preserve and restore the ecosystems in a landscape, at the same time developing new agricultural practices and protecting biodiversity. So land use planning and land rights are an important part of the adaptation to climate change. Local support is critical. We should not be so arrogant as to believe we know what's best. The people that live in a landscape are the ones that know what's best. We can help them achieve the best solutions. We can open up new knowledge to them, but we also need to respect local traditions, customs, and approaches and beliefs. Women and youth are critical resources in this, and we need to bring them on board and indeed positively tailor many of the approaches to the involvement of women and youth and put into use simple, actionable packages of information. And thinking about how you transfer that information over a mobile device is a very, very interesting and useful discipline for making it simple and actionable. But at the end of the day, we also need to prove that the approaches are working. So evidence of impact is critical. Governments can help us with their policies by making sure that communications are available to some of these hard-to-reach areas. Also making sure that physical access and financial access are promoted, as well as infrastructure for health and education and the involvement of the private sector. At the end of the day, landscapes are not sustainable if there is nobody there to work in them. So we have to make farming in those landscapes a profitable and respected rural profession, recognizing farmers as custodians of the environment around them, and encouraging them to balance both farm and non-farm usages. So in summary, what we're seeking to generate in AIRCA are more viable rural communities, reducing risk for those communities and increasing sustainability, with the aim of generating better nutrition, increased incomes and greater opportunity, so that the people in those communities have an improved quality of life and greater social stability. What we bring is expertise across a range of ecosystem and crop types, competencies in the health of humans, plants and animals, as well as the ability to act in an integrated fashion and to respond rapidly and efficiently to the needs of landscapes, countries and communities. We've got a pretty long established track record of working in many countries worldwide and strong partnerships with major organisations like the CG and FAO. So we aim to put research into use by strengthening those capacities for sustainable improvements. And what we can contribute, I think I've listed already, so I won't labour this slide in the interests of time. But what we've learned is that indigenous crops and animals are often the ones that are best suited to the region. New crops and varieties can come in and improve climate resilience or resistance to pests and diseases, but they need to be introduced carefully with the supporting seed systems, information and knowledge to help farmers grow them effectively. But once it's established, that crop and diet diversity is essential for nutritional security. But it needs to fit into the local cultures and traditions, not just being about the supply of calories. Linking farmers to markets is also critical, providing the support and information necessary for farmers to get into new or higher value market chains, helping farmers organise and brand their crop so that they can perhaps achieve a higher share of the value they've created by delivering a higher quality product. Agroforestry systems yielding fruit, coffee and bamboo can be important in providing farming communities with alternative or better sources of income. And as I've mentioned before, it's important to consider not just farming income and livelihoods, but non-farm and off-farm alternatives. So maybe we can establish processing capabilities closer to the farmers themselves so that the local community can add more value. Mobile, as I've mentioned, can be incredibly efficient in terms of much greater reach than traditional extension services. One estimate has put the cost of reaching farmers through mobile communication at $1.1 as opposed to $8.5 per farmer for mobile versus physical extension. And you can see the sort of things that mobile communication has been used for. So we really can, if we, again, integrate what we're doing, produce a very holistic set of information services to promote landscape approaches. I'm going to close there. Perhaps during the discussion session, we'll talk more about one landscape that AIRCA has looked at in detail, which is the Lake Victoria Basin. And for that, we've developed a concept note to address both the immediate development issues of poverty and low agricultural productivity, but also the longer-term challenges of that livelihood of improved human capacity, governance, and involvement of youth and women. So I'll say thank you very much, Madam Chair, and take a seat.
Thank you very much, Trevor. Maybe what we can do, Trevor, is entertain a few questions, if we have any burning question before we move to the panel discussions. Yes, over here, maybe a micro, please. Marita, we have a lady in the blue over here. Oh, yeah. Oh, I don't think they're going to hear you. To that person in blue, the lady in blue. And Trevor, you might want to come here. Yes. Yeah. And if you have questions to Dyno as well before we move to the panel.
Hello. Okay. How are you taking into account changes that are going to happen as a result of climate change and then preparing farmers for that? I worked in rural Montana this year, and we were trying to get farmers to change practices based on the changes that were coming. So how are you actually seeing what climate impacts there are, translating that to what people can understand, like you will have less water, and then giving people tools to react to that?
Sure. So I think across the range of AIRCA centres, my colleagues are doing a variety of different things. So AVRDC and Crops for the Future are very much looking at new varieties that might be much more tolerant to the challenges that will arise from a changing climate in a particular landscape. Ismahane and her colleagues at the International Centre for Biosaline Agriculture are looking at the challenges of salinisation, which will be a major problem going forward, but also techniques of improved water management, more crop per drop, if you like. At CABI, we're looking at how pest and disease occurrence in crops is changing in response to climate change, and looking at how we integrate that with forward models of climate change to say which areas might be at risk of particular pests and diseases that aren't at the moment. So coffee leaf rust is a major problem for coffee growers. We are seeing it spreading to different latitudes and higher up mountains in existing growing countries as the climate changes. So we're doing those sort of things to try and predict where we need to get communities ready to adapt.
And how do you get the information to the actual farmers?
Again, a variety of methods. CABI is very active in using mobile telecommunications. We also run plant clinics, which are a little bit like a human healthcare clinic, but they're for sick plants rather than sick people. And again, that's a very personalised face-to-face service where we work with the communities directly.
Do we have another question? Yes, we got several. Actually, I'm going to pick up just one, and then the rest will be in the panel discussion. Yes, please.
In your discussion, you're talking much more about crop diversification for farmers and how that'll help build resilience. But on the other hand, many donors and many development agencies are focusing on markets and having farmers be more specialized in their crop production in order to get in the value chain. How do you bring those together, the value chain approach as well as diversification? How can farmers do both?
Certainly what we see in many of the countries in which we work is that farmers are not monocroppers, particularly smallholders. They perhaps have a main crop that they focus on. You know, a lot of the farmers we work with are growing coffee or cocoa, but they will then have vegetable gardens, either for the local community or for their families. And so helping them actually not just with getting better value for their main cash crop, but also making sure that they grow, perhaps for themselves and their local community, a much more varied diet which doesn't just focus on calories, but focuses on vitamins and micronutrients. The two things are important.
So thank you very much,
you.
Trevor, for being with us. And I would like to remind you that the white paper is outside if you want to pick up a hard copy, and it's on the website as well. So I would like now to invite my colleagues for the panel discussion, Dr. Hans, Director General of INBAR, Dr. José Joaquín Campos, Director General of CATIE, and Dr. Eklabya Sharma, Director of Program Operation in ICBA. And you got colorful micros. Yes. Yes, thank you very much. So I'm going to start with CATIE and Dr. José Joaquín. José, we have been hearing a lot about corporate climate-smart agriculture, and I think some critics have seen also a negative connotation with it. And they're saying it's doing the same thing with a new word, but stay same methodologies. So I would like you, please, to help us understand it better, so what climate-smart agriculture is for you. And also, tell us more about CATIE climate-smart territories model that you have been applying in Central America, and tell us how does it relate to climate-smart agriculture, and how could we get the desired impact at scale that Dyno mentioned within the SDGs through either climate-smart territories, climate-smart agriculture, and what have you.
Okay, thank you. Is it working? Well, good morning to everyone. And I said it is a pity that these things happen, but it's not the first time. It happened with sustainable forest management. I remember in the late 80s, people criticizing and saying it's the same old story about logging, conventional logging. Also with sustainable development, it was criticized. I was involved in a program of ICDPs, Integrated Conservation and Development projects, and they were also criticized. But I think they bring something new. Some years ago, I was concerned that I didn't see in the agricultural sector the changes that society and the planet required. But in the last years, I've seen lots of things going on. New people doing different things, new research, new training. Now we have the Global Alliance on Climate Smart Agriculture, lots of countries and organizations engaged in that. Lots of institutions like ours working on how to reconcile production and conservation. So I think Trevor gave a very good definition in his presentation. I don't have the time, but it's about bringing together different objectives about productivity, adaptation, which is very important for some regions like where I am from, and mitigation, it's reducing emissions, but also very important, how do we contribute to better livelihoods, especially for those who are more vulnerable. And there are many examples, agroforestry systems, agroecological principles, and we have developed some research, for example, in silvopastoral systems where you could actually achieve higher productivity at the same time with better adaptation, you know, in milk or beef, and the same with coffee. And or developing new varieties for coffee that are better adapted to warmer conditions and more resistant to coffee rust. Now, this, in the case of agriculture and at the farm scale, I see it is more about developing technologies. However, as has been said here a few times, we're talking about complexity. So how do we address complexity? There is a lot of work on promoting collaboration, and which is actually named about collective intelligence. And this is what you could achieve when you work at the landscape scale, is how do we bring the different capacities, resources, networks from the different people in that landscape to work together, creating the enabling environment for negotiating when there are competing land uses. And I think there is a very good connection. You work with the technologies at the farm level, climate smart agriculture, but also you create the software, the smartness of bringing together the different actors to create that enabling environment, and this is through the climate smart.
Is the novelty the packaging then? So because it's packaged, or because the zoom in, it's a higher level, we are looking at it from 1,000 feet instead of 10 feet?
Exactly, and it's to bring, to bring the different concerns, the different objectives. I remember when I read a report about 15 years ago, commissioned by a donor about the impact of watershed management in Central America, and the conclusion was basically that nothing. And CATIE was also engaged in watershed management. So we started discussing with our colleagues, why is that? And when you see such a tremendous conclusion, you need to start questioning the paradigm. And we concluded that we were actually addressing watershed management only from the technological aspects and not about the social aspects, because a watershed, any landscape, is a social construct, and you need to work with the social, institutional, political processes that create the conditions for good management or for degradation. So for me, is bringing those capacities for people. It takes time. It's also complex, but for me is the right way, and the one that it's going to be more sustainable to keep also.
Thank you, José. So I'm going to move now to Ismahane and Eklabya. Tell us the success story in Ismahane. It's about another beautiful title, which is Climate Smart Villages versus Climate Smart Territories. So tell us, what is it? What's the Climate Smart Villages, and how does it differ from Climate Smart Territories, or how do you apply Climate Smart Agriculture in that system?
Ismahane works at two scales when we think of landscape. One is a transboundary landscape, which is quite big in the dimension as well as geography. So that is one type of landscape where we try to bring policies across the countries where the landscape is shared, number one. Number two, then the societies who are actually part of those landscapes become the integral part of the work that we do. But when it comes to the climate smart village, then we try to focus very much down on the ground. And here, what we see very clearly is how we are going to strengthen the livelihoods of the people. I think that's the first thing. And when we talk about livelihoods, it's much more beyond than the crops. I think this is the first thing. Then we also try to promote climate smart practices within that context, looking at the sustainable development goals, very specific to mountains and hills. That is what we do. And the principles are integrated approach that we follow very much. We try to see very much multi-targeted areas. It's not just crop. As was described here, how we manage pests, how we manage soil fertility, how we are going to address the social issues. In case of Nepal, the out-migration by male and women left behind to manage the resources, natural resources. So this is very, very important. And then the practice or technologies which we bring, they are affordable. This is very, very important for the farmers. And then they should have a chance of replication. So we should start seeing replication right from the beginning. It's not towards the end. Coming to the smart interventions, we have 6 types of interventions, and they include economic, social, and environmental securities for the farmers. The nutrient smart. So we try to have a natural alternative to chemical inputs, so more organic in the mountains, because if we pollute the mountains, the downstreams are also polluted. Then we look into water smart, simple methods for addressing water scarcity. In the mountains, if you have a prolonged dry season, the water becomes an issue for your crops, for your livestock, for your own consumption. So that is crop smart. Then testing in the field, climate resilient crops, as was mentioned, and also promoting sustainable cropping approaches that I can give a number of examples. Then energy smart. See, without energy, farmers cannot do. So lots of access issues have come. So we are looking into approaching climate friendliness and climate resilience in terms of energy, biogas, and number of possibilities as crop residues can be used as energy source. Then we are thinking of, or we are working actually on future smart, especially coping with the uncertainty of changing climate and insurance system for the farmers. For the first time in Nepal, we have been able to start in this particular climate smart village. And finally, ICT smart, which was mentioned by the keynote speaker, Trevor, bypassing language and technological barriers. I think this is very, very important. So these are the 6 smart areas where we are working, and here in a landscape integrity, we are trying to also address, in addition to agricultural crops, the natural resource management for water, for forest-based resources, the rangelands, which you mentioned, the pastoral systems, because mountain people also depend on pastoral system, the wetlands for hydrological recharging, rejuvenating springs, which is a major issue in the mountains right now. All springs are drying. How can we get the springs back? I think this is a big challenge that mountain regions like Hindu Kush Himalayan region is facing. Our glaciers are melting, our feeding in the river systems are also becoming less and less. So there are new challenges which are coming. And for the farmers, I think they need some sort of a support, so which this particular effort brings.
Thank you, Eklabya. And I think it's very interesting to see the different landscapes that you are talking about. So and that's really the purpose of the panel discussion, is to really give you examples of how AIRCA are performing actually climate smart agriculture in different landscapes. So we're going to move to our third speaker, Hans. And as the DG of the INBAR, my question to you is, why do you think bamboo is important for a landscape approach or climate smart agriculture? And what could it be offering in the perspective on the landscape restoration?
Thank you, Ismahane. As you say, very different perspectives so far. I think I will give yet another perspective. I represent an organization that basically promotes and works with producers and users of bamboo and rattan. Now, why bamboo? Basically, it is a plant that has amazing ecosystem services. Bamboos hold soil like no other plant. They are good to basically hold erosion, to control erosion, and to stabilize riverbanks. You're asking, what do you do with your springs? Many countries in Africa and in Asia are starting to plant bamboo around their rivers, around their springs, to maintain that water flow. They are, after all, the source of food for a number of very charismatic species. The giant pandas in China are the obvious one, but the gorillas in the Virungas in Uganda and Rwanda and DRC, the Bala monkey in Ethiopia, there are primates in Indonesia, in Vietnam. So they are a very important component of biodiversity conservation. And I think the last thing is that the erosion control goes actually one step further. We've got experience where we've been able to introduce bamboo in areas that are completely degraded. Bamboos grow quite fast. They're the fastest growing plant in the world. Their root systems will easily take hold, and therefore they can then restore degraded land. And in fact, the leaf fall, which is a continuous process throughout the year, will bring back both organic matter and nutrients and chemicals. So very important for environmental purposes. But at the same time, I mean, bamboos are basically cut by the poorest of the poorest They're very much the bottom of the value chain. Fine, you can make all kinds of very fancy things with them, but it starts with people basically cutting bamboo by hand. And because bamboos are not that heavy, very often that's done by women, and in some cases it's done by disenfranchised groups. So a very social aspect. And then bamboo can be used, for example, and again, something you mentioned earlier, I think, for energy. It's one of the areas where we believe there is a major opportunity. Local communities that are off the grid, that have basically no other options to look for possibly solar panel, okay, great, as long as it works, but once something goes wrong, you need an engineer to repair it. If you had a bamboo grove in the backyard, you could basically cut your bamboo, it grows back next year, you can cut it again, you can keep cutting, and you have your own source of household energy. And last, but certainly not least, once you cut bamboo, it becomes a commodity. And in fact, currently, the international value of trade in bamboo is worth about $60 billion US, and it is growing. So, you know, the sort of things that bamboo can basically be the source of: construction materials, flooring, fibers for textile, fibers for pulp and paper, and now more and more interesting modern innovations as composites using bamboo fires with plastics to actually make, for example, pipes, activated carbon, charcoal to use for filtration purposes. So a whole variety of uses of bamboo as a commodity. The Chinese reckon there are 10,000 different uses. So, you know, a major opportunity. Now, there are some questions. I mean, one of the questions we are at the moment dealing with, we are doing a study, and that is invasiveness. A lot of people say, bamboo, ooh, it is invasive, it's bad, we don't want it. The problem is that in Europe and in the United States of America, very often the Chinese bamboo has been introduced. It is a temperate bamboo, and it is a bamboo that has very virulent root systems. It doesn't spread through seeds. It basically has root systems that go. But there's only a small group. There are 1,600 different bamboo species, and therefore not all bamboos are invasive, not all bamboos are a problem. I think also, because bamboos occur throughout the tropical belt, most countries have natural, endemic, indigenous bamboo species. So you don't have to introduce new species. You can actually work with what is there. So that whole question about invasiveness is a question we're dealing with. We will have a report out, I guess, by the middle of next year, which we will share with everybody. It'll be on the web. But that's a question. The other question is water. Again, people say bamboo sucks water like nothing else. Again, it depends. The highland bamboo in Ethiopia lives very happily at 450 millimeters a year. So the different species have different requirements.
Thank you, Hans. Absolutely, we hear from you. It's an interesting commodity to look at within the biodiversity umbrella that we discussed earlier in the talk of Dyno and Trevor. So, José, I love the word collaborative intelligence, collective actions, participatory governance. They're all very, very appealing concepts. And I wonder, what does it mean for a landscape approach? Development has been mainly focusing in the old days on input-based models. So we have been in the Green Revolution, we have seen it. It has focused on few crops. It has focused on very, very high and aggressive input system. So are you, as CATIE and AIRCA, preaching the different models? Or is it the way you are using the inputs?
Well, first, I would like to say that evolution on this planet is being based on collaboration. Evolution of life is based on collaboration and even our brain is made of 100 billion cells. We are 7 billion people on the planet, and the brain works because it's connected. Cells are connected. And it's all about collaboration and connection. One example, I'll bring forest here because I think it should be mentioned as well. A very successful approach is the model forest that was developed in Canada. Probably you know that. And it was developed because they were having lots of problems with forest lands being given to the industry that were claimed by the First Nations in Canada, social and environmental groups involved, the federal government, provincial government, all fighting among them. And finally, what they found is that sitting together and discussing the issues is not easy. Actually, they found the solution to manage forest resources at the landscape scale based in collaboration. So what you need is to create the structure, the platform of decision-making, negotiation, dialogue. How do you bring different knowledge together, the scientific knowledge with the knowledge already in the landscape, traditional knowledge, the native crops that they are producing there, or the native bamboos. And so it's an encounter where you would bring all those and you exploit that collective intelligence, which is actually being developed. There is a lot of science behind collaboration and collective intelligence. MIT, they have established what they call Climate Collab. They have the Institute of Collective Intelligence. Stanford as well is working on the Stanford Social Innovation Review. You can Google it. And they have produced different reports saying that the most important impacts that have been found in the US in different sectors, health, education, it's about collaboration. It's the result of collective action, collective impacts. And it's so obvious, but sometimes we don't see the obvious things. It's when you bring people together and you create the conditions for those capacities to work is much different from the 30 years ago projects that were top-down projects where the director of the project had the solution to all the problems, and we were wasting the intelligence, the knowledge that it's in the landscape. So I usually ask, where if we're talking about climate-smart territories or villages or landscapes, you need to ask, where is the smartness? For me, that's the key question. If we are talking about, well, where is the smartness? Is the smartness in the technologies? Probably, but I see it more as the result of the knowledge being implemented. But for me, what creates the equivalent of the brain is those social processes, those governance structures. In some, for example, we are working in watershed management with what we call collaborative committees for management of the watershed, where local governments, the central government representatives, NGOs, academic and scientific organizations are represented, private sector as well, farmers. And in Model Forest, they created what's called the board of directors that takes place of, it could be a formal or an informal structure, but it has to be functional, which is how do you make decisions together. And this is also like the missing link between those policies at the national scale and the actions at the farm scale. So the landscape, it's in the middle, and it's the one that could create the conditions for policies and institutions to actually make an impact at the farm scale. So yes, have a look at the term collective intelligence, collaborative intelligence. At some point when I was thinking about that, I thought that, well, it is something like that. And then I found and I bought a book by Donna Markova, and she's been working for 50 years in what she called collaborative intelligence. So there is a lot of work that we are not using from other disciplines.
Thank you very much, José. That's a very interesting concept, and it talks specifically about landscape and inclusiveness of all stakeholders. So going back to Eklabya, I read through the document that when you started your pilot project, you were aiming for 200 households, and you got to the 1,000 household within less than a year. So I'm just wondering what really helped you get that very high success rate, and how do you foresee similar successes happening in other landscape than Nepal?
I think here I'll pick up from you, Joe. Where is the smartness? I think in this particular program, we have picked the smartness, and that is the women. 88% of our partners with whom we work, 88% are women. And the situation is because most of the youth male are migrating out from the mountains, and they get a little bit of remittance. But actually the women, they are the custodians in the mountains for their fodder, for their firewood, for their water requirement, all farming activities. They are the ones who are doing, and I think we got them. This is the first, I would say, smart step that we were able to take very much. And then we didn't go for individual household approach. I think this is another smartness, I would say. We went with the farmer women groups, which kept the steps or the work rolling, and which has actually helped in rippling effect. I can give you example. By the time we demonstrated 20 rainwater harvesting tank for small irrigation of crops, it was replicated by farmer groups by 175. So our interventions was only 20, but already 175 were taken up by farmer. So why this happened? I think some of the take-home messages from our side, I think I would like to share for the benefit of people here. See, in climate smart village concept, I think we have to see the level of participation of the people and the simplicity. It has to be simple. You cannot go with big theories which is not practical. So we have to have simple, affordable. See, I said the tank which we prepared, so demonstrated was affordable. And all of a sudden the replicability was already there. You have seen 1,000. Instead of 200 houses, 1,000 households have taken up these in 4 villages very clearly. So simple, affordable, and replicable are the, I think, keywords here for us to when we design our program. Then in each intervention, I think what we have to see is locally relevant. See, what resources are there locally? If you try to intervene and bring intervention which is more exotic, which is coming from outside, not relevant for the local people, it may be good for demonstration, but it will not pick up. This is what we have observed. And it has to be linked with the vulnerabilities of the farmers. See, if the resources are going down in terms of fodder, if we bring good fodder species, they will pick it up very quickly, and other intervention can follow. So we have to see which is where there is a vulnerability and which one is to pick first. Water was one thing which we picked up, and it really rolled, in my opinion. Then increasing access to market, which was mentioned by Trevor very clearly, and here we were able to do that because this CABI was not very close, but still about 30 kilometers away from Kathmandu. So there was access. If we can provide that access to the market, I think we were able to do weather information and increase community capacity for bargaining decisions. I think this is quite important, and the women were able to do that with the people with whom they were linked. So this is where we have helped, and our local NGO called CIPRED was quite instrumental for negotiation, even with the extension officers, the agriculturists. So much of the inputs have come from there. Then ownership of local people. So it has to be very clearly seen, whatever interventions we are doing. So it has to be a more participatory approach, design, when you design, consultation. I think that really helped us. And local government. If we have some local government already present and they have extension like livestock officer or agriculture officer, if they are part of this demonstration, then that really picks up. And we have seen that for further upscaling, that really helps. So from one particular village or one cluster of village areas, the extension is then learned, no others, so that then goes to other villages, other clusters. And finally, I think use of local resources, very much local government schemes. There are many local government schemes. If you are able to link to that, then the replication takes very quickly. And finally, the local knowledge is also quite important. We need to appreciate that. We need to adopt that because that is being practiced by people for decades and centuries. And if that is being taken note and clearly put into the scheme of work, then that really picks up. So finally, what I would say is that, as you have asked, whether it can be taken to other landscape. I think the approach, the process, the thinking, crops may vary from one landscape to another depending upon the elevation. But major issues in the mountains, if we are able to address, like migration is one issue, and if we focus for women in this intervention, it works. Whether it is CABI or whether it is Pakistan village, where from Pakistan or Indian Uttarakhand, so it works. So it's thinking, I think, if we bring that, what are the major issues and how we are capturing the smartness, I think is the first thing. If we are able to do this, in my opinion, it can be replicated. And ICBA has 6 transboundary landscape and we are taking these to all these 6 landscapes after testing here in Kabri district. And they come in a different situation. The one in the west is an arid situation where we have to have a different experience. And here, few of the AIRCA colleagues are going to be part of that partnership to implement in Wakhan, Karakoram, Pamir landscape very much. So this is what we are thinking, but we are already working in Kailash landscape, and in Kailash landscape, China, India, Nepal are collaborating already, and some of the value chains very much targeting them and going on climate smart villages is the approach. Then there are other landscapes in the Far East, Yunnan, Myanmar, and Northeast India, Bhutan, Nepal, and India, for Kanchenjunga landscape. These are other landscapes where we are already seeing the possibilities, and I see there is a lot of possibility in terms of thinking, concept, design, process. Crops may vary. The issue at the local may vary, but I think there is a lot of potential for replicability.
Thank you very much, Eklabya. So from what I'm hearing, really, the landscape, it's a social construct. So the technological solution that most of the international organization we're working with, it's very important, but the social aspect, the governance aspect are as important as the technological one. So moving to Hans, and just to follow up on your 60 billion as being the figure for the trade of bamboo, and it is a commodity at a globe scale. What are your challenges when you are promoting bamboo? And do you think if you put it within a landscape approach, would that help you? Would that help the smallholder farmers as well? Especially hearing from Trevor that by 2050, we'll still have 40% of people living in the rural area, out of which 70% going to be still smallholders.
Thank you, Ismahane. I think there's a couple of challenges. If I look at the governance that you mentioned, one of the problems bamboo has is that it sort of falls between 2 stools. Foresters say it's not timber, it's a non-timber forest product. So foresters are not that excited about bamboo. And they'll say it's a crop. The agricultural community says, yeah, but it's not a food crop, so we're not that excited about it either. So, you know, the problem is that the traditional sort of box almost where you would want to put bamboo is difficult to define. But I think what we said earlier about the SDGs, what I find exciting is that we're actually talking with other ministries responsible. I'm talking now at sort of national level. Energy was mentioned before. This is a major opportunity, and it goes down, or goes up, I guess, from household level. I mean, you could burn bamboo as sticks, but you can make it into charcoal, which is much more efficient. You can then gasify it, and you can actually start thinking about industrial creation of energy, basically. I mean, there are plans afoot in Indonesia, in Kenya, in Japan, to use bamboo as a source of power for a power plant. So there is, you know, a discussion there with the ministries of energy, with the energy commodities. We mentioned construction. In Latin America, in Ecuador, in Peru, in Colombia, bamboo has been used for centuries to make basically earth-proof housing. So there's a lot of experience there on using bamboo. The building codes have been adapted to allow bamboo to be used in the building codes. So there we work with the ministries of construction and with engineers and with architects. So it isn't just the forester agriculture dilemma almost. I think there are other SDGs, other governance structures that we actually find bamboo has a real residence. To give you an example, interesting enough, our current chair of the council is Jamaica. Our focal point in Jamaica is neither the Ministry of Forestry or Agriculture, it's the Ministry of Industry. Jamaica sees bamboo as an industrial opportunity. They are looking to basically make money out of bamboo. And using bamboo again to stop some of the erosion that they are faced with every year when the typhoons come through. So a combination of both. Now at a local level, I think one of the key problems, and you mentioned it, Trevor mentioned it earlier already, is for farmers and for producers to get to the market. Currently, we have 41 member states, and they, if you look at a map, are basically 40 of them are bamboo-producing countries, global south. They produce, they make things, but the market is in the EU and in America, in the US. So for these small and medium enterprises, because there aren't really that many big industries, for them to produce goods that are acceptable to a European market and have standards that basically fit within the European timber trade regulations and are certified to a certain extent, it means there's a lot of work to be done at the grassroots level to link that with basically the people that actually buy the goods. It's something that we are starting to engage with more and more and more, to actually talk with countries in, let's say, the north, if that's the right way of putting it, the ones that actually are the main market, the main international market, because there is also an enormous domestic market for sure. And to look at how we can facilitate that access to the market and how we can help with standard setting and how we can work with producers to actually reach the sort of, requirements, as it were, for international. So I guess those are the two challenges that I can immediately point out. There are many more, but in general, though, I think the opportunities are actually more exciting than the challenges.
So I think it's time to open it for discussion, and then I'll come back to my panel for some recommendation. I already see a hand here, so maybe I can give you more microphones.
Hello. Yeah. Hello. My question would be for Dr. Eklabya Sharma, and it's got to do with some possible unintended consequences of, the climate smart village intervention that you've explained to us about. I was able to go to Cabri-Palanchok district, which is the district where you have your pilot project, earlier this year. And I was able to speak to some of the farmers, and I spoke to some very sharp farmers who were raving about the plastic ponds that you have executed over there. But from my own personal observation, considering the social population of Cabri-Palanchok, and we have touched upon, discussing the social context of these interventions as well. Cabri-Palanchok it has multiple ethnicities, right? It's got the Brahmin ethnicities who are politically most powerful. It's got the Tamang ethnicities who have Mongoloid ancestry who are less politically powerful. So as you go along in this development intervention, do you also keep track of which ethnicities are benefiting more? Because I met a Brahmin farmer, and he was very sharp and very smart. And the stereotype, forgive me for stereotyping, but the stereotype goes that they are sharper. They're quicker to, move ahead in life, And, given the context of inter-ethnic animosity that we have in Nepal right now and so much conflict, do you keep track of such things, like which ethnicity is getting more and what's the relation, the changes in social relations between them because of your intervention? Thank you.
I think it's a very, very good question. So Climate Smart Village, we have started working in 1.5 years' time now. And suddenly I fully agree with you. When this earthquake happened, and this is one of the area where the earthquake had happened, and really lots of loss of life and properties. And we could quickly see some of these smart people within the community. They were very quick to pick it up, and they were able to come back to normal. So I fully agree. Those societies where we have very people who are not so much smart in that sense, is sometimes laggards, and suddenly we will like to have that type of analysis, and that will definitely help us as we move to far east and far west. The composition are quite different. More indigenous people are dominating or are part of the community, whereas in Nepal you see much more heterogeneity in terms of composition, especially in Cabri. So suddenly that will be our part.
Thank you. Simon Hall with the National Wildlife Federation. Just wanted to thank for the introductory presentations, and the panel discussion has been very interesting. My question is in regards to some of the economics around some of the climate smart agriculture and the things that have been discussed today. It's just sort of a general question for anyone on the panel. If you could just sort of, from my experience, there's often tends to be sort of upfront costs associated with the implementation of more sustainable practices on the ground. Especially with, talking about sort of the disenfranchised subsistence-based producer groups and the villages that have been discussed as well. So how were you able to overcome some of those? What was was it a value sort of proposition, or you know, how did you overcome those initial upfront costs to sort of create a more sustainable model that doesn't just rely on you know, a gift to sort of get that moving?
Who would like to take on that question?
Let me just explain you what is happening, particularly in China, but in some other countries as well. I mean, basically bamboo farmers have very, very small plots. They work together. They basically work in cooperatives. So in a way, those costs are spread across more than one individual person. Having said that, of course, there is also a certain input on infrastructure that is certainly in China was produced through government interventions. So that is where, in a way, maybe the Chinese development model is rather special and not necessarily replicable for every country around the world which has bamboo. But I think the key issue is that, you know, at the moment there are really no large-scale bamboo plantations. There are maybe one or two. I mean, I saw when we were in the World Bamboo Congress a few months ago in Damyang in Korea, a presentation from a company in Brazil that has a sizable bamboo plantation. But normally, bamboo is farmed by very small farmers, and they basically need to work together to get up the value chain.
Maybe José, you want to take on the economics of the climate smart territories as well?
Yes, well, some of those climate smart practices would be profitable on their own, even competitive. Some others wouldn't. But I think what we're talking here is about producing public goods at the same time as private goods. And so how do we incentivize the provision of those public goods? And there are some financial mechanisms like payment for ecosystem services that have been implemented in some places of providing favorable credit loans to farmers and or accessing niche markets. And for example, I'm going to use another example of forest. The community forest concessions in the Maya Biosphere Reserve in Guatemala, the most successful conservation strategy has not been the national parks. It actually has been the community concessions where they are logging and they are harvesting non-timber forest products. And they have been able to engage with the makers of guitars in the US. And now they are actually selling the products with added value, higher prices, and that has actually made a significant difference in the livelihoods of those people. So you need to I think you need to change the mindset, the paradigm in policies and institutions to say, well, we need to continue producing public goods, otherwise we're going to continue in this degradation trend that we are going. I see that this is a good opportunity for a transformation of the agricultural sector and the forest sector that is needed to happen at this time of the year, but also this require a higher level of conscious, I would say it, which is actually, it was discussed here, but well, how do we benefit the other groups? And I think this requires a different level of conscious, less selfish, but this is,
Thank you. I'm Jonathan Wadsworth from CGIR. Thanks very much, everybody, for the initial presentations and certainly the panel discussion, which I think is starting to really get going from my perspective from the last intervention from José. Great example of institutions working globally, internationally, different organizations with different skill sets and different motivations and strategies working together for a common cause, for a common good, common outputs. And I think it's notable also and logical that landscape level work is taken as being a framework on which to work. And I think the point of view that I would like to put forward is that let's think more about what you can do at landscape scale, not only as a social construct, but also sort of bio-ecological, etc., environmental, which you can't do on an individual scale. What I've heard mainly, I think, this morning in your approach to climate smart agriculture is very much the sort of stuff that people can do individually. And we used to use a term called climate proofing of agriculture, or making agriculture climate proof 10, 15 years ago. That's what I'm hearing in this room right now, until José spoke just then. I think what's missing for the smartness of, the third piece of smartness of climate smart agriculture is mitigation. And I haven't heard anything about that particularly yet. So I've got a question for the group on how can those incentives be created for actions by individual landowners and land users which would mitigate, which are unlikely to be done on an individual basis, but looking over an entire landscape could start to become carbon, reducing the footprint of agriculture to a point which is significant in climate change. And then that starts to answer the question of, so what are we doing about the aquifers, and what are we doing about the springs which are drying up? Do we plant bamboo around them, or do we think more long term in how can the actual climate in some way help to preserve and increase those resources, rather than always adapting to a bad situation? How can the situation be improved?
Thank you, Jonathan. Who want to take that question? Yes, Eklabya.
I think this is a very important point in terms of concept, how adaptation and mitigation could be taken. And in case of ICBA, I can give you a number of examples. When I was talking about reducing chemical, for transporting so much of chemical from outside and production of chemical, that is a very much part of mitigation. Using more local organic resources in given communities, I would say that is a mitigation very clearly. Then in our program on RED+, involving women groups, to have RED+ program is part of mitigation. We were talking about more on agriculture here, but when we talk about landscape, there are many mitigation efforts that we have started. And I would say when we combine all these, if you recall what I said, we work in two scales. One scale is a bigger landscape where countries collaborate, and there we come up with all these RED+ mechanism, how to take wetlands for overall hydrological management, for recharging at a bigger landscape of 30,000 square kilometer, for instance, in Kailas, or other landscape which I mentioned. So we take those areas as integral part of bigger landscapes. And when we come to villages, then we take this smartness approach and bring both technological and social aspects to see how we can make such villages more in terms of adaptation as well as some mitigation. But when we take bigger scale, then the mitigation is part of our program.
Maybe just to very quickly respond, give you an example in Ethiopia. The Sustainable Land Management Program in Ethiopia basically has included bamboo as one of the key factors. So they are not just looking at planting bamboo around spring, but actually including that in their overall picture of land and water management. And again, because of the very fast growth of the bamboo, it can actually be used in areas that are particularly prone to erosion, but it is looked at as an aspect of the wider landscape, and it's part of the long-term program to basically see how we can address land restoration in Ethiopia.
So let's move on a little bit more questions. Yes, please.
Yeah, I'm Pramod Agrawal from CJRC CAFs, and I'm really happy to hear from Eklabya about climate smart villages. CCAFs, as perhaps many of you know, pioneered this concept of climate smart villages. It's not only in Nepal, actually today roughly 18 countries are practicing climate smart village process and the whole approach. One key point which perhaps didn't get highlighted, in fact even village is a model of a landscape. It's politically bounded, and largely because one of the goals of climate smart village is to scale up climate smart agriculture. So when there are political boundaries, it becomes much easier for scaling out. You know, there are some affinities and policymakers are able to scale out. And of course, mitigation is certainly one of the key areas that we also focus, but not always. It depends, are they really emitting significantly? So we do address mitigation. And the final point which I would like to highlight, climate smart village is not only about current climatic risks, it's also preparing farmers for future climatic risks. So lots of interventions are there which also ensure that what farmers are practicing today or what we recommend to farmers should not lead to maladaptation in future.
Thank you very much for your comments.
Okay, thanks. Tassine Jaffrey, Centre for Climate Justice, and my interest is looking at the impacts of climate change on the poorest and most vulnerable. So my question was to Hans, really, if you can share some examples or insight into how bamboo has or can be used to reach the poorest and the most vulnerable, I guess under the banner of sustainable energy for all and energy for all. There's focus on that, but we tend to not really consider what we mean by all, and I see this as quite a potential exciting and idea to move forward. But just to get a sense of an example or a case study where it has reached the poorest, I guess.
Let me give you an example of a case study in Allahabad in central India. I mentioned it very briefly earlier. This was an area that was effectively used for brick mining. So they stripped the topsoil, they then stripped the first 2-3 meters of clay. And sometime around the turn of the century, the industry collapsed. So all of a sudden, the people there had nothing. They basically lived in a desolate landscape. It looked like the moon. There was grass, and that was it. And we worked with a local NGO, Rattan, and basically said, let's try. Let's see if we can actually restore this with bamboo. And 15 years later, last year, we went back to have a look. And it is now an area that is green, lush. They've managed to cover something like, help me out, Ori, I think it's 80,000 hectares. Basically by learning and by replicating. And these are people that had nothing. The interesting thing now is if you go there, it's not a bamboo forest at all. They've used bamboo as a pioneer species. So they used bamboo to grow things underneath. They've got aloe vera, they've got medicinal plants, they've got other crops. They've intercropped with fruit trees, with other trees. But slowly, slowly, rebuilt their livelihood and are now doing reasonably well. So that was a very, very clear example of the lowest and the poorest of the poorest who are now doing well.
José, you want to add?
Yes, I could share another example that in a program that we are implementing in the Trifini area, which is an area shared by Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. It's a watershed. And that area is actually some of the poorest people in those 3 countries live. And actually through our work with this Mesoamerican Agro-Environmental Program, with a landscape approach, actually this is where we are implementing this idea of the climate smart territories. 30% of the people who have worked with our program, they didn't have land. They were landless people. Mm-hmm. And they managed, because there is support, and this is to Jonathan's question, support from the governance structure at the landscape scale to facilitate those people to have access to land some way or another. And now they are growing different crops and they are producing food and they are selling some excedents. So that's one way. Another examples of integrating, you need to have scale in order to, for example, attract private company. In some examples, for example, in Costa Rica beverage companies, they have been paying for ecosystem services because they depend on the quality of the water that flows in the rivers, and they are paying farmers to practice good forest or agricultural practices.
Thank you very much, José. Emil? Yeah?
Emil Frison with the Board of Eco-Agriculture Partners. I was very pleased to see the importance of diversification that was highlighted here, as well as looking at the social dimensions. I was a bit surprised not to hear the word agroecology being pronounced in this context, and not only as agroecology as a set of agronomic practices, but also as a social movement. So what do the panelists think about that?
Well, actually, agroecology, I think I mentioned, probably not strong enough, but using agroecological principles, it's one of the things that when we talk about climate smart agriculture, agroforestry, I would say it's agroecological practice as well, but enhancing carbon, producing more biomass with the idea that you could increase carbon content in organic matter in the soil, and then enhance a great deal of biodiversity there as well, which actually brings more productivity. And this has been measured. We have actually measured when we add some components like trees, that we have increased productivity at the same time as generate those ecosystem services that we're talking here about.
So it's part and parcel of
Yes.
the package.
Yes.
So we have one question here and one last question from Trevor. Yes.
Yes, hello. My name is Max Harriman from Crops for the Future. Jose, just picking up on that theme, coming out of the Green Revolution, of course, we ended up with an outcome today where, in fact, more than 3/4 of all of our food comes from wheat, rice, corn. Throw soybean in there and it becomes an even higher percentage. So I'm interested in how we move climate smart agriculture and agricultural diversification into the mainstream. A lot of the good work that is being done seems in the minds of many to be on the periphery, whilst the CG system continues to focus on the major crops and how we improve productivity, and moving into a world where in fact the landscapes are changing. Is it still a sensible approach to keep looking at using fertilizers, irrigation, pesticides, mechanization, to keep trying to change the landscape to keep growing the same crops? And how do we pick up on that? And before you answer, ladies and gentlemen, on Monday afternoon at 4 o'clock in the hotel next door here, the Regency, Hyatt Regency, the former Prime Minister of Malaysia will be opening a signing ceremony for a declaration on agricultural diversification. If anybody would like to be invited to that, and it's by invitation, look at me, please bring me your business card, and I will try to arrange and accommodate as many of you as I can to get you an invitation to that event on Monday afternoon at 4 p.m. So thank you, Jose.
Jose, yeah, please.
I think we need to work with consumers. We all are consumers, educate consumers. In the case of forestry, forest certification worked. I remember WWF working with consumers, not the industry, because they were working with the industry, with governments, and they didn't have success in changing forest management practices. So they went to work with consumers here in Europe, and then there was a demand for forest certification. So, but also educating the consumers, you need to work with other sectors, education, health, and promoting healthy lifestyles. I'm so glad that in my country now, I listen every day, lots of ads from the Ministry of Health talking about healthy lifestyles and what do you eat, more diversified diets. And what we are integrating, we are diversifying what farmers grow through the Mesoamerican Agro-Environmental Program. And this has been very successful. The farmers are now producing more crops, and there are many crops. We are in Mesoamerica, which is one of the richest areas in producing agricultural crops. So we have our germplasm collections as well, and I think it's both ends. You need to educate the consumers, that's the demand, and we do need also to support farmers.
Yeah, so to add to Jose, it's a very important question, and I think we are whole when we talk about healthy landscape, it has to be with diversified crops. So I think it's the push from the consumer that will make the difference. Do you want us to take one more question? Because we have still the recommendations that haven't come up. Yes.
Well, I just maybe there won't be an answer to my remark, but I just wanted to reiterate what the person said about mitigation, which is extremely important. But in addition, it's an under-considered subject, and today there is more and more research that shows not only that the plants can contribute to mitigation. We've heard about water flow and recharge of groundwater, but there's also a contribution that's being recognized for creation of rainfall, which is very important. And if you're interested in learning about these things, there will be a presentation that is not listed on the program on Sunday morning at 9 o'clock and Pavilion E, booth 29.
Thank you very much. So we have only about 2 minutes left, colleagues. So if you have one recommendation to make to a policymaker, could you make it very short? Eklabya,
okay, mountain agriculture needs a differential approach. So I would like to urge big countries like India, China, to have a policy which would be quite different for the mountains, and all the donors who fund for mountain agriculture, I think they have to have a different approach in terms of agriculture. And what I also say is that the approach should be that which can be affordable and replicable. I think this is very, very important. We design very big extension services with lots of investment, but time has come. I think we have to get more approach which is acceptable by the people.
Thank you very much, Eklabya. Hans?
I think for me a very simple message is that we would encourage all governments in the Global South to consider bamboo as one aspect in their climate change mitigation and climate change adaptation strategies and sustainable development plans.
Thank you very much, Hans.
Yes, and collaboration is not only within the landscape, it's also between sectors. So decision makers need to work agriculture, environment, health, education. There was a very successful strategy that was developed in Central America between the ministers of 7 countries of agriculture, environment, and health. And tomorrow, you are invited to a launch pad at 5 o'clock, where the ministers of agriculture of Central America, along with different research organizations, we are developing a partnership to promote climate-smart agriculture. So this is an announcement as well.
Yeah. So thank you very much to the whole panel. You got many invitations, guys, including the one that José just said tomorrow at 5. You got the CAPAD one on Monday at 4, and we got the one on the mitigation tomorrow at 10. So 9 a.m. Come at 9, not 10, guys. So join me in thanking the panel.